Hello and thank you for joining us. This is the Tuesday edition of Journalist Hangout. I'm Ayodele Uzubakun. Today on the program, federal government warns states against hasty reopening of schools, says low testing responsible for decline in confirmed cases of COVID-19. Senate President Ahmed Lawan warns ministry, departments and agencies, says National Assembly would not tolerate disrespect from political appointees again. And later on the show, floods ravage Niger, Kebbi and Zamfara communities, render thousands homeless. I'll be hanging out with Solomon Ajuziogu, while Mayor Akikbelu will be joining us via Skype. So if you are ready, let the hangout start now. As Nigeria continues to ease COVID-19 lockdowns, some state governments announced plans for reopening of schools. But the federal government is warning against hasty reopening of schools, saying the virus remains potent and dangerous. Chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Boss Mustafa, says Nigerians need to be guided by experiences from countries like Germany, France, and the United States and the United Kingdom, where reopening of schools in some cities led to spikes in number of cases. Let's hear from the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19.
This position is informed by the fact, in spite of our enhanced testing capacity, the number of samples collected for testing have not been very encouraging. While we intensify our targeted testing synergy and strategy, we still urge the states to expand the scope of their sample collection. In this wise, we implore Nigerians to get tested and present cases requiring treatment early to reduce our unavoidable fatalities. Testing positive to coronavirus is not a death sentence. Not testing and concealing cases of symptoms and presenting late is what leads to death. Get tested and get tested now. As we plan to reopen more sectors, we must stay the course and stick with our winning strategy, which is anchored on the ability of our health institutions to contain the virus, while we as citizens wear our masks properly, stay away from crowded places, avoid mass gatherings, maintain simple hygienic practices, and as much as possible protect the elderly and most vulnerable to this pandemic. It is in the above context that the Presidential Task Force appreciates the ongoing calls for reopening of the education sector, and indeed some subnationals are already making preparations for such. Whilst the PTF does not discourage making such preparations, we need to be guided by experiences from countries such as Germany, France, the United States, and the UK, where opening of schools in some cities led to an increase in confirmed cases and fatalities.
Let me just take this. This is like a note of warning to states like Lagos State. Now, when you see the role that Lagos State has played so far in handling this pandemic, Lagos State is like has been like first among equals, talking in terms of state they've been able to handle very well, courtesy of Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu and Professor Akin Abayomi, who is a bioscientist, and all the steps they've taken all through the time the pandemic came to this Lagos. The novel case that we had, the man from Italy.
The index case.
The index case, okay. From Italy, Lagos State has actually handled this so well. The number of people they've discharged, the number of people that have been treated, and when you talk about the worst hit state, it is Lagos. Now for Lagos to say, we want to open schools, we want to start with the university, from university we'll go to primary and secondary school, September, tentatively. Do you understand? And the federal government is giving this note of warning. What do you read between the lines?
I think that basically it's a sign of loss of control first. It's an indication of, okay, it's not in our hands at the central level. We have devolved the responsibility for containment to the states. And so now that the states want to do their thing, then they have to be careful. Now, I would have thought that, okay, in this case, it's not sufficient that you are sounding a note of warning to the states. You have to show some sort of leadership that you have been showing right from the very start of this outbreak in Nigeria and how, it's been controlled. I would have thought that at this stage that it's not enough to lament, it's not enough to cry out. You have to take authority, you have to take responsibility, you have to put in strictures that will limit these things. Now, you are asking the states to, okay, see what you can do, because you have devolved that responsibility to the states, to the local governments, and then to the people themselves. I also think it's an indication of the fatigue, the coronavirus fatigue, restriction fatigue. It seems that people just got tired of having to not live the normal life. So there is a quest to normalize life. Parents want the children to get back to school. The children want to get back to school. And you can get the feeling everywhere.
And you can't close the schools in perpetuity.
And you can't close the schools in perpetuity. And so we have this desire to restore the calendar so that the children don't have wasted years. But then you have the universities there, you have the secondary schools there. But then the signs have always been that when the crowd comes out again, where people come out in such huge numbers, crammed in one place or in a lot of places, the problem you have is that these numbers begin to go up again. I guess we have been able to slow the tide of, the prevalence of the virus in a way because of the restrictions, and though we think that they weren't enough, but we've been able to, at least stem.
The fact that we've not been testing enough.
Well, that's one side.
That's why we've not gotten
that's one side of
the real figures.
No, but that's one side of it. You may say real figures, but the issue also is this. I think that people have become sufficiently aware. Whether they are now taking personal responsibility for themselves is another matter. But the fact is that there's a quest to go back to normal life. We have a situation of restriction fatigue. There's a need to save the calendar, the school calendar, so that life will go back to normal and everything. But the problem is, all through these 5-7 months that we've been in one form of restriction or the other, what have we done in the schools? What protocols have we set up in the schools? It's not just enough to measure temperature. It's not just enough to say that people should wash their hands. It's not just enough. Have we expanded the classrooms when we hold lessons, when you have children, 50 pupils in a class, or 100 or 120 students in one classroom? Can you afford to put them together like that? How are you going to split the school system, the lesson structure in the classes when the schools resume? Have you expanded those facilities? Have you run boreholes, and have you provided running water in those places? When we saw the other time the children resume in school in GS3 or SS3, we saw people commissioning plastic bowls where people will wash them. I don't think that that's sufficient. I would have thought that over this 7-month period, we would have run boreholes in schools. Probably we would have expanded also the classrooms, infrastructure, so that we can then think of, okay, one lesson, 120 pupils, do we split one lesson into 3? So that we can have physical distancing, social distancing. And how can you control physical and social distancing amongst children?
Okay, let me, Mayor Akikwalu, and it's as if the Lagos State, they went through this, and they've told Lagosians that they are taking precautions, and but with this pronouncement by the PTF, one thing might happen. You might have a state like Lagos State University. They've already announced the day of reopening, but University of Lagos might not announce because that's under the federal government purview. So this might be what we have across the country. Okay, I guess our engineers will still be working on getting what the picture I painted here now is that I read earlier. I think the Vice Chancellor of Lagos State University has announced the resumption date. Immediately, the state government has given them the go-ahead. But a school like University of Lagos might not announce, since the federal government is saying that, oh, you guys need to be circumspect.
Yeah, there are dialectical issues in the first place. ASU had already taken a stand on all of this, that it would be suicidal for the universities, for schools to even open in the first place.
Really?
ASU is on one hand having a strike. Then the other thing is, for all the safety measures, for all the safety protocols, what is the capacity of Nigerian institutions, the high institutions, whether they be whether they be polytechnics?
I just imagine the state of our hostels.
That's the point.
And
no, well, students may not be in school, on campus students in this matter. And
with
that's
a school
going
like
to be
University of Lagos, that you have predominantly people coming from outside to attend lectures, and some people will have to squat. A 4-man room will turn into 16 man, you know, that kind of thing.
So that's a challenge on its own. But then you have a situation where people are going to be in classes, and you know you could have as many as 120 students for a class meant for 50. So what are you going to do? 150 students, so a class just meant of maximum of 50.
Can you remember that's
MCB1.
MCB1, yes.
MCB1 and 120 of us, 150.
MCB1 then.
MCB1 back then.
I can just picture that class now.
So
and
you can imagine
MCB1 take.
So say you are having a Mass 101, for instance, and you have, say, 150 students in that class, one lecturer. Are you going to split that course into 3 sessions?
Yeah. The way you did writing for
in order to create what? In order to create physical and social distancing.
Yeah.
But then where you have young people and deviant behavior generally, where you have young people, you will also have a lot of deviant behavior. The question is, how much can you control? How much can you effect these measures? Where are the hand washing points, the hand sanitizing points? Where are how much disinfecting have you done in these high institutions? So these are for me, these are the major issues. Now you also have a situation where there is a downturn in testing. It seems as if the states are tired. I mean, it's a lot of money. The amount of money you have to spend, at least 50,000 naira per test. And you imagine that someone is tested, who tests positive to the virus, and then you have to move to the isolation center. And imagine how many tests you have to run until the point you get negative. So imagine how much the states are spending first on tests, first on keeping people in isolation centers. These are sums of money not budgeted for. They have become monies you have to spend by environments due to this force majeure called the coronavirus. So the point is, there is a general fatigue, but I'm worried that I've been asking myself, for the period that we have had this lockdown, for the period that we have been fighting to contain the virus, these days, the downturn has gotten to the point where people seem to just get tired of what's going on. And then the second thing is, what have we done to ensure that, okay, we're not going to be in lockdown in perpetuity? At what point do we open up business? What are the strategies we have put in place to open up, everywhere, to open up the schools, to get life back to normal? People say that life is not going to get back to real normal. You have what you call the new normal.
The SFG gave the instance of Germany, France, and the United States, and they came back to school and there was a spike.
Yeah, naturally, these are countries that you would think that they have things under the wrap. They have the protocol set up. But you see, that answers to the issue that I raised earlier when I said, how do you keep young people? How do you really, where you have young people, these large number of young...
Mayor, are we ready to go back to school?
The problem with COVID-19 protocols has to do with lack of testing. It's not as if it is going down, but it's just that there is lack of testing. And the reason for that lack of testing, the state governments are reluctant to spend the money required to do those testing. Lagos is doing that because Lagos is investing so much money in it. But a lot of other states are not doing that. And that is why the federal government has to come in and try to bear the cost, because we are just deluding ourselves that we don't have, that we have turned a curve, or that we are flattening the curve. We are not doing that. It's because of lack of testing. Most states are not testing, are not doing testing, and if you don't test, you will not have enough numbers to show the extent of the community spread. So that is the problem. For us to solve the problem, the federal government has to come in and take over the cost of doing this testing, because I think a lot of states are, maybe because they don't have the resources, or the executives in those states don't care enough, they don't bother to test. There's a particular test that even the NCDC themselves said they tested about over 20,000 in 1 month, and the following month they did 5,000, which shows that they are practically not doing enough. And if you remember, even when we started, the testing was based on those who have need for it, not that anybody can walk in and do the testing. So if you want to open schools, one of the protocols that we must observe is that they must test students in those schools regularly, and everybody must be able to walk in and do a test if he wants. If we don't do that, we're not believing ourselves that we are flattening the curve. The community spread is there, the pandemic is still on, but we are not doing the needful.
We're not doing the needful. Now we have a little over 50,000 confirmed cases, and we have over like 1,000 deaths. But Mayor is telling us that we should not delude ourselves that we're in any way flattening the curve, that there's still dangers and everything. And if we test, and we've been doing that effectively, we might have recorded over 100,000.
I think so. I've always been worried about the lack of capacity to test. I have always said this on the show. And to imagine that at the moment, at its highest limit, Nigeria can probably test just about 3,500 in a day at the highest limit, and that is spasmodic. It doesn't come, frequently. You had him here talk about where you test, say, 20,000 at this point, and then at this other point you are testing 5,000, there is fatigue already. The states have spent so much money, they don't want to keep spending that amount of money. Maybe then the federal government has to say, and that's why I said the federal government is devolving this responsibility to the states. The states don't think they have the funds. They cannot keep shelling out that money in perpetuity. The federal government will probably have to step in a bit and see where they can work out a middle ground. But then, too, I also sense that whether it's at the federal government level or at the state government level, what we have is that people just seem tired. People just seem tired. We can't, how can people, maybe we should just let these things roll. That's the way the whole thing looks to me.
People are dying.
Unfortunately.
Keep an adequate record for that.
Unfortunately,
have the number of deaths recorded. A lot of people, that this COVID-19 has claimed. You just feel that just died of normal illness and everything. But
it's rather unfortunate. It's not a problem that started now. I think it's a problem that started from the very point the fight started. Lagos State might have recorded a bit of, advantage. They've done a bit of work on this. Not many states can sustain the argument. There's a state that says that it doesn't have a case, and a state that does not even want to testing, that does not even want testing done at all, and does not even want anything registered against the state. Okay, so you have situations like this. But the other problem is, I worry so much about strategy. Okay. I have seen some of the schools. If we are going to open the schools, where is the running water in the schools? Where are the disinfecting facilities in the schools? What arrangements have you worked to ensure that these protocols are adhered to? It's not easy. And then how do you ensure enforcement?
For the private schools, it's going to be easier.
I don't think, I don't want to.
For an entrepreneur, somebody that gets his school fees and everything, can say, okay, for government to come and inspect us, we're going to make these things available. But public schools, we need.
I would have thought that the public schools would have been the ones that would have been able to do this easier, because first it is government that is driving the fight against the coronavirus. Now it is the standard you said.
Of releasing funds, of doing so many things, but it trickles down.
Well, you may talk about bureaucracy, but you've also heard about the doctrine of necessity and force majeure. Doctrine of necessity necessitated by force majeure. Now the problem you have with that is that, look, we've seen situations where things have had to be done very quickly because we're in, external situations. It is the public sector that has to set the pace about how the private people will get the jobs done. Because one thing I have found out is that probably the best professionals are in the public sector. Forget about the bureaucracy and the rest of them. So the public sector, because the federal government is the one driving the fight against the coronavirus, the private people will have to see the way the federal government is doing it. They have to see the way the state governments are doing it. They are the ones who have the capacity, first and foremost, to expand the schools, to ensure that they draw out a schedule for school children, to ensure that they draw out the schedule for workers. The state government, the public sector, could afford to say, oh, level 1 to 7 today, stay at home, level 13 to, like that. It is the standards that are set. It is the laws and the policies that the public sector, that the federal government or the state governments put forth, that the private people have to follow. They can't just do things on their own.
All right. If you're just tuning into us, this is Journalist Hangout. We'll be right back after this breather. Thank you for staying with us. Now, the cordial relationship between the executive and the legislature attracted commendation, but it appears something is amiss. A seeming lack of respect for the parliament by some government appointees is brewing, and the lawmakers won't have more of such. President of the Senate, Ahmed Lawan, warns ministries, departments, and agencies against disrespecting the National Assembly, as they will no longer take insults from political appointees. Senator Lawan believes that the APC Consultative Forum, inaugurated by President Muhammadu Buhari, will bring good governance. Let's hear from the Senate President himself, Senator Ahmed Lawan. Okay, while we are waiting for that sort played, and Solomon, it has always been, even before this night's Senate, we have a situation whereby delay in terms of, if you remember, Abubakar Bukola Saraki's senator, and they actually complained that they used to have problem with some of these agencies disrespecting government departments, failing to show up to defend their budgets, and that's contribute to the slow pace of passing of the budgets on a yearly basis.
I think that on the face value, there are lots of reasons why this could be so. I think that also this is first and foremost a reputational issue. The reputation, as Yoruba will say, the reputation will always precede you. So whatever perception I have about you is the way I'm going to relate with you. There's a particular perception about the National Assembly, there's a particular perception about the executive, and there is a perception that they have of each other. And that's where the problem is. Sometimes it seems that the people in the National Assembly appear to arrogate to themselves, either inadvertently, executive powers. For instance, there's the issue of, say, constituency projects, for instance. And that constituency project thing is something that makes it look as if that the people in the National Assembly, that lawmakers, tend to exhibit executive powers, which they do not have. And then sometimes they also think that having been representatives of the people as well, they can hold the executive to account to a certain level, that if some things do not comply to certain standards or conform to certain standards, they can put them in check and tell them, no, that's not the way it should be done. And then those who have been appointed by the president or those from the presidency also think that, look, the president has the executive powers to execute things, to get things done. It is not the National Assembly that has that job to be done. So,
Okay, to me now, I thought the responsibility when we started this night assembly, I thought the executive arm, they took time to make sure that they monitor the process, who is going to emerge Senate President, who is going to emerge the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and After their emergence, they pledged that APC, blah, blah, they're going to work in synergy and give Nigerians good governance.
I think the problem with the issue of the MDAs not respecting the National Assembly has to do with perception. The National Assembly statutory has to have an oversight function over the executive. But because the way our politics is structured, you will see that the executive play a major role in who becomes what. Those who run the affairs of the National Assembly, the executive play a major role in how they got to where they are. And so there is this perception of a weak National Assembly, which does not deserve the respect of the executive. Because when you see people who had this, when they come to the National Assembly to meet committee members, they come with this arrogance of not being accountable to the National Assembly. And the National Assembly, unfortunately, is powerless to make them do what they want, what is right. Because if the National Assembly passes resolution, the executive may decide to ignore it, which has happened several times. And I think the only way we can strengthen that is for the National Assembly to work on its image and how it is perceived. If the executive or those who are the MDAs believe that members of the National Assembly can control them and put them in check, they will respect them. You know, before, when the National Assembly was very strong, when a minister is going to defend his budget, they do it to be able to pass that budget. They are fearful that their budget may be cut or may not be approved and all that. But now that fear factor is gone. They just believe that, oh, we can go there and do whatever we like. There's nothing we can do. And the National Assembly will complain to the president to say, look, call your appointees to order, and the president doesn't do anything. So it is the way we have found ourselves, and it will take a long time. It is not enough for the state president to mount it that, oh, we are not going to accept anybody that disrespects us and all that. The point is, you have to take their own image and get serious. The National Assembly, the executive, and the constitutional,
So I was thinking that the principle of separation of powers, and then that these party things might hamper the National Assembly from working. In the 8th Senate, we had a situation whereby they were at loggerheads and they didn't make much of it. As in, a lot of people will see that, they will say that, oh, because they were at loggerheads, Nigerians did not enjoy the dividend of democracy under them. Now, this 9th Assembly, a lot of people will say, well, it looks like a rubber stamp National Assembly. And have we made any progress?
Yeah, I think that's where the problem is. The National Assembly is not supposed to either be in opposition or in friendship with the executive. No. They have a statutory responsibility to hold the executive accountable, to speak on behalf of the people. They do not have the executive powers all right. They cannot be the ones executing. It is the president that has a mandate to do some of the things that he's doing. What the National Assembly is doing is to help him create the laws, help him create the instruments of authority to do the things that he does. But then, on the other side, while he's executing those things as well, while the president and his ministers, his appointees are doing those things, the National Assembly is to ensure that those things are done properly. When it is finished, did you comply with the rules? Did you break the rules? Did you do it in conformity with the wishes of Nigerians? Now, the problem is, if the National Assembly has not been able to acquit itself, or if it is perceived that the National Assembly people have not been able to acquit themselves in that regard, then that is a problem. Now, the point is this. The 8th Assembly, headed by Bukola Saraki, it was unfortunate that there was a bit of there was this sort of loggerheads. The fact is, it should not have been a loggerhead per se. It should have been a situation where we saw that the Bukola Saraki 8th Assembly was actually holding the executive to account. There, you saw a manifestation of the separation of power, but it was used for the wrong purposes. Right. But in this case, and the president acted well in, first of all, saying, trying to be the Democrat that we expect, that he will not influence who emerges. And then in the end, he had that sort of problem where they were at loggerheads. This time, the party decided that we will have a say, we will be deeply involved. But then, in the end, it's now turning out to seem like, okay, rubber stamp. But then it's no longer a sort of rubber stamp, because we have a situation where these issues have come up again. We've seen this situation where it was Festus Kayama, the 774 jobs and SIP, so social intervention. You had Chris Ngige also on this matter,
NSITF.
you know, on NSITF. Then you had Senator Godswill Akpabio on the NDDC matters. And so
and you have Rotimi Amechi
and you know, you keep having these issues. So the issue is there might also be something else that is not obvious to the rest of us that is also causing this as an undercurrent.
Undercurrents. All right, we have to leave it there. Flooding is becoming a recurrent disaster in many parts of Nigeria. This year, the menace is running its ugly head again. Residents of Zamfara, Kebbi, and Niger states have been battered by heavy rain, leading to flooding. The latest flood disaster witnessed in the states have left thousands of people homeless and hectares of farmland across several communities destroyed, with meteorologists predicting heavier than usual volume of rainfall later in the year. Residents of flood-prone areas and governments must act early. Like in Lagos now, we have the intel already. There are some areas that the Ministry of Environment in Lagos State have actually addressed the press to tell people that you need to quit certain areas. I think 5 local governments that will be affected in Lagos heavily. At any moment from now, the Oyon Dam is going to be released and we're going to have flooding. But the way it has ravaged Zamfara, Kebbi, and Niger states, Mayor, it's worrisome and government must do something about it.
I think the issue of flood is something that we have to take seriously, and it has to do with lack of preparation, because the meteorological department usually issue releases concerning flooding and other flash points in different parts of the country. And when we know that something is going to happen, especially because it happens every year, I expect the government to have prepared for it. And part of it has to do that there is no adequate plan for flood ravaged areas. And our response when we have this disaster is also slow. You know, we attach so much importance to reactive actions, instead of us to make enough preparations to avoid such disaster. And it's before flooding is not something that was very prevalent in another part of the country, usually the coastal areas and cities like Lagos. But because of increase in farming in the north and dependent on that to be able to assist in this agricultural department development, it leads to a situation where we have because periodically, especially when you have large amount of rainfall, there is need to release water from the dam to be able to protect it from collapse. And because the water so released is not properly channeled, we just have this. And then part of it is also that the increase in rainfall recently has contributed to this flood disaster. But I think the government has to be proactive. There is need for them to prepare before you have the rain season, so that we don't react when it becomes fait accompli and there's nothing much we could do. I think that's the major problem. It's the lack of government to prepare for what they do.
I think Mayor was talking about government being proactive, but from what we've gotten this year, it's going to the second quarter, last quarter of this year. It's the natural. It's going to be heavier. The downpour is going to be heavier, and I don't know what we've put in place to actually checkmate flooding.
This is an unfortunate disease, in quote, in this country, where these things happen all the time. And then we wait for it to happen. Like a friend of mine once said, he said, may your blood not be used to write the rules. Sometimes we know the things that are supposed to be done. We refuse to do them until we now suffer the consequences of those things, and then we become reactive in order to checkmate them maybe in the future or for the immediate. And then once it ends, once the rains go away, we forget about them. These are some of the problems we experience all the time. Already this year, 270 days of rains have been predicted, and
is that achievable now?
Days. Well, we had a situation, we had a hiatus July to August. We normally would expect heavy rainfall in June and July, but this year in Lagos there was a lull, and then naturally you would have August, which is the August break. But then it seemed we had an elongated period of the August break from July to August. But then the Mets have predicted that it's going to pick up again in September. And here is the first day of September. We've had rainfall here where we are in the studio area. We've had rainfall today. And so that is an indication, and let's see how it comes. But it's natural that these things will occur. The floodings will occur first in the low-lying areas and the river basins. We have a lot of river basins, the Benue River Basin, all the way from Cameroon, and then you have the Niger River Basin, all the way from across 9 West African countries, from the Futajalon Islands in the Senegambia Valley, where the River Niger runs through and then ends in Nigeria, in Niger Delta. So you are going to have this problem along this. You have the Hadejia River Basin as well. You have the Osun Ogun River Basin. That's usually where you have the Isheri, Osun area, where the floods, ravage and all of that. But then you are also talking about the whole of Lagos, and you know that the whole of Lagos is low-lying and
below sea level.
Exactly. So you have a situation where in those places where you don't have rivers, you are going to have flash floods still, because you are very close to the coastal areas. But I also think that if Lagos has this sort of problem with all the investments that Lagos State has done in this area over the years, the Fashola years, the Tinubu years, the Fashola years, saw a lot of investment in setting up the environment in such a way that these things won't be a problem. But we lost a whole lot of that during the 4 years.
Ministry of Environment.
Exactly. But then we lost a whole deal of that in 4 years during Akinwumi Ambode's time, when he didn't pay a lot of attention to it. And I hope that we're not going to pay dearly for that
trying to
at this time,
put everything
because we lost 4 years of doing that, because there was massive investment by Lagos State in the Ministry of Environment for these problems. And we saw that this 4-year period, the drain ducts were not really effective in the last 4-year period and all of that. But we hope that the current Governor Sanwo-Olu, will be able to right that wrong in that area. But these things will happen. There is also the problem of climate change. This is also as a result of the climate change issue. The glaciers are melting, the ice at the polar regions are melting, the sea levels are rising, and so when the rain falls, you have a situation where the distillations take place, the rains fall, and then you have this situation where the rivers overrun their banks, and people who live along the banks, along the coastal areas, along the river basin banks are going to have problems. And then we have the problem of food security, because farmlands will be ravaged. We've seen already flooding in Kaduna, we've seen flooding in Niger, we've seen flooding in Ikorodu in Lagos here, and all the Lubiri areas, Ajegunle and the rest of them. We've seen flooding in Kwara Jeba area, we've seen flooding in Akwa Ibom, we've seen the ones in Zamfara, Sokoto and Kebbi already. So we're going to see a whole lot of all of this during this time, if the 270 days of rain as predicted really come.
It's been nice being with you, Solomon.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
And Mayor Akipelu, despite we have hiccups, the fact that we have hiccups with your audio system, thank you for your contribution also. And that's our offering today. Join us tomorrow for another episode of the program. You can watch Journalist Hangouts on our platforms showing on the screen. We're on YouTube, youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. Our feedback channel is Journalist Hangouts at tvcnews.tv. I'm Ayodele Ozubakun. Bye for now. God bless Nigeria. Please stay safe.